Have you ever been asked to give up your place not because of what you did, but because of who you are? Imagine sitting beside your sister, proud, peaceful, heading home after years of hard work, when a flight attendant leans over and says, "Could you move for someone else?" And when you ask why, the air turns cold, every eye in the cabin watching, waiting, judging. Do you stay silent, or do you stand up calmly, with dignity for something bigger than a seat on a plane? This is the story of Malik and Zora Jackson, two siblings who refused to trade their self-respect for comfort. One phone call would change everything, a confrontation that stopped a flight, a truth that challenged prejudice, and a choice that reminded everyone what quiet courage really looks like. If it were you, what would you do? Would you move to keep the peace, or keep your seat to protect your worth? Stay with us, because this flight didn't just take off, it lifted hearts, opened eyes, and grounded a truth we all need to remember. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us tell more stories that move the soul. The coffee pot hissed softly in the corner of Malik Jackson's apartment, filling the kitchen with the rich smell of dark roast and routine. It was still early, barely 6:30, and the Chicago skyline outside his window was only beginning to blush under a pale sunrise. Malik stood by the counter, sleeves rolled up, tie still hanging loose around his neck. He moved with the careful precision of someone used to making plans before the rest of the world woke up. The smell of toasted bread mixed with the faint hum of the city below. Behind him, his younger sister, Zora Jackson, was bent over her tablet, scrolling through an academic article while sipping orange juice. Her curly hair framed a face that looked equal parts focus and mischief. "You know," Malik said, glancing at her reflection in the window, "most people don't start their morning reading about social inequality before breakfast." Zora looked up, eyes bright. "And most people don't design skyscrapers while quoting their dad's sermons about fairness." He smiled. Touché. The siblings had shared that kind of banter all their lives, gentle teasing built on deep respect. Both were the pride of their Atlanta family. Malik, 40, CEO of Jackson Design Group, one of Chicago's fastest-growing architecture firms. Zora, 35, a sociology professor at Northwestern University whose lectures about racial equity were known for making students both cry and think. Today wasn't about work, though. It was about home, about flying back to Atlanta to celebrate their parents' 50th wedding anniversary, a milestone wrapped in decades of faith, love, and struggle. Zora set the tablet down and leaned back. "I still can't believe Mom and Dad have been married 50 years. That's half a century of putting up with each other." Malik chuckled, buttering a piece of toast. "That's also 50 years of proving you can build something that lasts if both people keep showing up." Her smile softened. "You always find a way to make it sound like architecture." "Everything is architecture," he said, taking a bite, "even love." They ate quietly for a moment. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, blending with the rumble of an early train. Life in Chicago never truly slept. It only shifted gears. Zora spoke again, more thoughtful now. "Do you ever think about what it took for them to get here? For us to be here? Dad working 2 jobs so you could take art classes. Mom sewing dresses at night so I could buy my first college book." Malik nodded. "Every time I walk into a boardroom, I think about it." He looked down at his coffee, "And I try not to forget that some people still look at me like I don't belong there." Zora's expression softened with both pride and understanding. You don't need them to let you belong. Malik, you built your own table. He met her eyes, a quiet fire behind his calm. Yeah, but some days, I wish I didn't have to keep proving I deserve a seat. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with truth. It was the kind of silence that families earn through honesty. Zora reached for her coat. Well, you can rest easy today. The only boardroom we're walking into is Mom's dining room, and she runs that place like a Fortune 500. Malik laughed, grateful for the shift in mood. Let's hope the flight's on time. I don't want to be late for her Sunday roast. Atlanta doesn't know how to start a party without us, Zora said, tossing her scarf around her neck. They stepped out into the crisp Chicago morning. The air had that late spring chill that hinted at warmth but still carried a bite. Malik locked the door and glanced back at the framed photo near the entryway, him and Zora as kids, standing between their parents in front of their old church in Atlanta. He smiled. Some memories aged better than time. The drive to O'Hare was slow, the usual highway rhythm of horns and red brake lights. Inside the car, Zora hummed along to an old Stevie Wonder track on the radio. Malik's hand tapped the steering wheel in the quiet sink. Remember when Dad used to play this every Saturday morning, she asked. I remember him dancing while Mom pretended to be annoyed. Malik said, grinning. Zora laughed, pretended she loved it. You could tell by how she'd burn the pancakes just to keep watching him. Their laughter filled the car, mingling with the music. For a moment, they were just two kids again. No titles, no degrees, no weight of expectation. As they neared the airport, Malik's phone buzzed. A message from his assistant flashed across the screen. Safe travels. Boss, don't forget the presentation draft for Monday. He sighed. Zora noticed. You're not bringing work to Atlanta, are you? I might need to review a few slides. She shook her head. You're hopeless, just thorough. The terminal loomed ahead, gleaming under the morning light. Planes rose and dipped in the distance like silver birds tracing invisible paths. Malik parked the car and turned off the engine. Zora looked at him for a long moment. Hey, you okay? He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, just thinking. About what he smiled faintly, about Dad's words. The world may not be fair, but you better be. Zora exhaled. The phrase familiar and grounding. Guess that's our family motto. Guess it is. They gathered their bags and stepped into the flow of travelers' families juggling strollers, business people glued to phones, tourists snapping photos. The terminal buzzed with that peculiar mix of impatience and wonder that only airports hold. Malik adjusted his jacket, watching his reflection slide past the glass walls. He carried himself with quiet confidence. But inside, a whisper of unease stirred. Airports had a way of testing patience, and patience had a way of revealing truth. Zora nudged him playfully. Come on, big brother. Let's go catch our flight before Mom starts calling the FBI. He laughed, falling into step beside her. The sound of their rolling suitcases echoed softly behind them, a rhythm of family, purpose, and calm before an unseen storm. Neither of them knew that the next few hours would test every lesson their father ever taught them about dignity, restraint, and justice, and that one phone call would change not just their flight, but everyone on it. The air inside O'Hare was a different kind of busy, the kind that hummed beneath your skin. Screens flickered with flight numbers, the scent of brewed coffee mixed with disinfectant, and 1,000 separate conversations tangled into one restless chorus. Malik and Zora moved through the crowd like two steady notes in a chaotic melody. They had checked in early, cleared security, and were now weaving past families, business travelers, and the usual gate commotion. Gate C16, Zora read from her phone. Looks like it's still on time. Good, Malik said, glancing around. I'd like to sit for 5 minutes before we get herded onto that plane. They found 2 open seats near the window, just opposite the boarding gate. The morning light poured through the glass, catching the polished wings of aircraft lined up outside. Zora pulled out her tablet while Malik reached for his planner. He had promised himself not to open it today, but habit was hard to break. Old sketches and meeting notes peeked out between pages' lines, angles, and visions of buildings he had dreamed into reality. "You're not working again, are you?" Zora asked without looking up. "Just checking something," he said, though he was already sketching the outline of a new project. "You need help," she murmured. Malik smiled. "I already have you." "That's enough trouble." Zora rolled her eyes, and that's when she noticed the elderly man sitting 2 seats down. He wore a navy blazer that had seen better years, a matching cap, and round glasses that framed eyes full of kindness. In his hands was a worn paperback copy of Eyes on the Prize. "That's quite a book for airport reading," Zora said, nodding toward it. The man looked up, his voice warm and gravelly. "Keeps the mind sharp. You can't forget the things that built the road you're walking on." She smiled. "I teach sociology at Northwestern. I actually use that book in one of my classes." He chuckled softly. "Then you're doing God's work? Name's Harold Jensen. Used to be a federal judge before I got tired of wearing the robe. Zora Jackson," she said, offering her hand. "And this is my brother, Malik." Malik looked up from his planner and stood to shake Harold's hand. "Pleasure to meet you, sir." "Likewise, son. Heading somewhere special home," Malik said. "Atlanta, our parents' 50th anniversary." Harold's eyes softened. 50 years. Now that's architecture worth studying. Zora laughed. "You sound just like my brother." "Well," Harold said, "I spent a lifetime in courtrooms learning that the best structures aren't made of stone. They're made of people the kind who don't give up when things get hard." His words lingered between them. Malik felt something stir the quiet recognition that comes when one soul recognizes another who's carried weight quietly for a long time. Harold leaned back, closing his book. "You know, I was headed to Washington. A reunion of sorts. 50 years since Selma. My knees may have quit marching, but my heart never did." Zora's voice softened. "You marched in Selma?" He nodded. "Back then, I wasn't anyone special, just a young lawyer with a loud mouth and a pocket full of dreams. Lost friends along the way, gained purpose instead." Malik sat quietly, his eyes reflecting the respect he didn't yet know how to express. "You must have seen things most of us can't imagine." Harold smiled faintly. "I saw courage and fear, and sometimes they wore the same face." For a moment, the noise of the airport faded, replaced by the silent gravity of shared understanding. Zora spoke gently. "Do you ever get tired of fighting the same fights in new forms?" Harold's eyes twinkled. "Justice doesn't retire. Professor, it only changes uniforms." Malik exhaled, almost smiling. "That's something my dad would have said. Then your father sounds like a man worth listening to." Zora checked the time. "We should start lining up soon. Across the waiting area. A gate agent announced boarding for first class. People began to rise, forming a familiar line of impatience. Harold moved slower than the others, folding his book carefully. Malik stepped forward. "Let me help you with that bag." Harold handed over his small carry-on. "Appreciate it. Old bones and narrow aisles don't get along." They joined the queue together. Around them, voices rose, someone arguing about seat upgrades, a toddler crying for candy, the tinny echo of flight numbers on the speaker system. Zora glanced at her brother. "You ever notice how airports bring out the best and worst in people?" Malik smirked. "Depends on the people." Just ahead of them, a well-dressed couple was having a mild dispute with the boarding agent. The woman, slim, blonde, mid-50s, was complaining about something to do with her husband's seat assignment. Her voice was firm but not loud, the kind of tone people used when they were used to being obeyed. "Ma'am," the gate agent said patiently, "I'll see what we can do once everyone boards." "Well, see that you do," the woman replied curtly. Zora gave Malik a look that said, "Please, not our flight." He shrugged lightly, not realizing how prophetic that glance would soon become. When it was finally their turn to scan boarding passes, Harold patted Malik's shoulder. "Good traveling with you, son. Maybe we'll share a story or two once we're up in the clouds." "Count on it," Malik said, smiling. As they walked down the jet bridge, Malik felt an odd sense of calm, like the universe had just introduced him to someone he was meant to meet. Harold's presence carried the weight of history, but it also carried hope. The kind of hope that whispered things can still change. Inside the plane, the cool air and faint scent of sanitizer greeted them. Passengers shuffled toward their rows. Malik and Zora found their seats in row 16, middle and window. The hum of boarding filled the cabin rolling suitcases, polite murmurs, the muted shuffle of overhead bins. Zora buckled in and turned to him. "He's interesting. That Harold guy." "Yeah," Malik said, looking out the window, "the kind of man who's seen the world break and still believes it can be fixed." She smiled faintly. "Sounds like you." He laughed under his breath. "I wish." The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 2187 from Chicago to Atlanta. We'll be taxiing shortly." Malik leaned back, eyes on the runway stretching endlessly ahead, somewhere 2 rows behind them. A familiar voice, the same woman from the gate, began to speak again, this time with a sharper edge. And just like that, peace began to unravel. The cabin air smelled faintly of recycled coffee and lemon sanitizer. Malik slid his carry-on into the overhead bin, careful not to bump the stranger seated behind him. Zora took the window seat and began adjusting the small air vent above her head. Outside, a ground crewman gestured at the wing, sunlight glinting off his vest. "This one's not bad," Zora said, glancing around. "Decent leg room for coach. Don't jinx it," Malik murmured, lowering himself into the middle seat. He reached into his briefcase, retrieved a paperback novel, and smiled when he saw the title, The Warmth of Other Suns. He'd read it twice, but something about flying made him return to stories about movement, migration, and hope. Passengers trickled down the narrow aisle, bumping elbows and muttering apologies. The flight attendants were already in motion directing people, smiling through fatigue, helping someone fit a too large suitcase into an already full bin. Zora leaned closer. "You notice that what the rhythm of airports," she said softly. Everyone pretended not to look at each other. He nodded. "Airplanes are like tiny mirrors. They show people who they really are. Before she could reply, a cheerful voice cut through the hum. "Good morning, everyone. Welcome aboard Flight 2187 to Atlanta." The voice belonged to the lead flight attendant, Sandra Miller, a woman in her mid-40s with neat blonde hair and a polished smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She made the usual announcements, then turned to assist a young mother juggling a toddler and diaper bag. Malik's attention drifted to the aisle. 2 rows up, he spotted Harold Jensen, already seated near the front, flipping open his well-worn copy of Eyes on the Prize. The old man caught Malik's eye, smiled, and lifted his book slightly, as if in salute. Malik nodded back, warmth flickering beneath the steady calm of his face. Minutes later, the aisle grew crowded again as a handful of last-minute passengers boarded. The boarding door stayed open longer than expected, and even Zora, normally patient, was beginning to fidget. "Looks like they're waiting for someone," she said, glancing toward the front. "Someone important. Probably." Malik replied, "Always is." As if summoned by his words, a woman's voice carried from the gate entrance. Crisp, demanding, and unmistakably irritated. "I was told this seat would be next to my husband's. How could this mistake even happen?" Malik looked up. The woman from the gate, Elena Carrington, stepped into the cabin, her designer handbag brushing against seats as she moved. She wore a beige pantsuit and pearls that caught the light every time she turned her head. Her husband, already seated near the front, stood halfway, looking embarrassed. Sandra hurried over. "Mrs. Carrington, welcome aboard. I understand there's been some confusion about seating." "Yes," Elena said, adjusting her sunglasses on her head. "My husband and I booked adjacent seats in premium economy. Yet, somehow, I'm back here." She gestured down the aisle with the faintest distaste. "There must be some error." Sandra glanced down the row numbers. "I'll check right away, ma'am." Malik caught Zora's glance. Neither said anything, but both sensed the shift. That subtle prickle in the air, an unease that had nothing to do with turbulence. The attendant scrolled through her device, lips pursed. "I'm afraid this section is full. Ma'am, I could ask if someone might be willing to switch." Elena folded her arms. "Well, do that, please." Sandra nodded and began moving down the aisle. The smile on her face tightened, professional but strained. When she reached row 16, she paused. "Excuse me," she said with her polished tone. "Would either of you be willing to switch seats? We have a passenger who'd like to sit closer to her husband." Zora blinked. "Where's the other seat?" "Just a few rows forward," Sandra said. "It's still economy class." But Malik interrupted gently. "We'd prefer to keep our seats. Thank you. We chose these specifically to sit together." Sandra hesitated, then tried again. "I understand, sir, but Mrs. Carrington is open, ma'am," Malik said evenly. "With all respect, we've already settled in." The attendant's expression stiffened. She glanced toward Elena, who stood a few rows away, watching. Malik could feel her eyes on them, curious, assessing. "Sir, it would really help us finalize boarding," Sandra said, her tone thinning. Zora's voice remained calm but cool. "I'm sure there are others who might be willing to switch." Sandra's polite veneer cracked just slightly. "Of course, I'll check." As she moved away, Zora exhaled softly. "Did that feel weird to you?" Malik looked at her, brows drawn. "Yeah, like we were the default option." "Exactly." From the corner of his eye, Malik noticed Harold glance back from his seat near the front. Their eyes met again. A silent question passed between them. Malik gave a small shake of his head, signaling it was fine for now. A few minutes passed, the cabin filled with the shuffle of seat belts and overhead bins closing. Malik tried to focus on his book, but the earlier calm was gone. Elena's voice floated down the aisle again. "Surely someone back there can move. I shouldn't be separated from my husband for a 2-hour flight." Sandra returned, now clearly flustered. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carrington. Everyone appears to have assigned seats." Elena crossed her arms. "Well, can't you ask them again?" Her eyes flicked toward Malik and Zora. Zora felt heat rise in her chest. She leaned closer to Malik. "You hearing this?" He nodded, jaw tightening. Sandra hesitated, then approached once more. Her smile had turned brittle. "Sir, ma'am, I understand your position, but Mrs. Carrington." Malik's tone stayed even. "Respectfully, this isn't about comfort. We paid for these seats like everyone else." The attendant's lips parted, but no words came. She turned away again, murmuring something to a colleague. The intercom buzzed. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure." Zora sank back, crossing her arms. 2 hours, she muttered. Just 2 hours. Malik didn't answer. He could feel something build in a quiet storm under the surface. Not anger, not yet, but a sense of déjà vu. How many times had he seen that same look someone convinced their comfort mattered more than his right to belong? He glanced out the window. The morning light had softened, the sky a pale wash of blue. Somewhere beyond the glass, engines began to hum. Then, from behind them, a soft voice spoke. "Excuse me," Harold said, leaning slightly into the aisle. "Everything all right back here?" Malik turned, surprised to see the old man watching, his expression calm but alert. "We're fine, sir," Malik said quietly. Harold studied him for a moment. "If you say so." Then he returned to his seat, though Malik could tell he hadn't stopped listening. The flight attendants moved briskly now, securing doors, stowing last-minute bags. Elena finally sat down, 2 rows ahead, still fuming softly to her husband. Sandra passed by Malik once more, her eyes flicking toward him but not meeting his. Zora leaned closer, whispering, "You think that's the end of it?" Malik closed his book, resting it on his lap. "No," he said softly. "Something tells me it's just taxiing for takeoff." Outside, the plane began to push back from the gate. The low rumble beneath their feet felt like the quiet growl of a story about to start. The low hum of the engines filled the cabin, steady and familiar. Passengers adjusted seat belts, closed laptops, and reached for last-minute sips of coffee. Malik placed his phone on airplane mode, exhaled slowly, and leaned back across the aisle. A baby laughed, the sound light and warm. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then the calm broke. Sandra appeared again in the aisle, her professional smile set like porcelain. Malik noticed how her eyes darted, scanning the rows before settling on him and Zora. "Excuse me," she began softly. "Mr. and Ms. Jackson." Zora looked up, cautious. "Yes." Sandra clasped her hands politely. "I hate to ask again, but we have a situation. Mrs. Carrington is feeling unwell, and she'd like to be seated closer to her husband for medical reasons. Could one of you move to the back? We have an open seat in row 28. Malik blinked. Row 28. "Yes," she said quickly. "It's still an aisle seat. You'll have more space to yourself." Zora frowned. "Didn't we just go through this?" Sandra's voice stayed calm, but her eyes flickered. I understand how this looks, but Mrs. Carrington's doctor has noted Elena's voice interrupted from the row ahead. I do have a medical condition. The airline has my file. Several passengers turned their heads now. Malik could feel the attention gathering like static. He sat forward slightly, his voice low but steady. "Ma'am, we already explained we booked these seats together. We have family matters to discuss during the flight. This feels less like a medical issue and more like preference." Sandra's smile wavered. "Sir, I'm just trying to accommodate everyone fairly." Zora's tone sharpened, though her volume stayed calm. Fairly would mean asking others, not just us. There are several single travelers on this plane. Sandra stiffened. "We're simply asking for your cooperation." Malik folded his hands, keeping his voice measured. Cooperation is one thing. Targeting is another. The word hung in the air like a chord struck too loudly. A few passengers exchanged looks. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Elena's cheeks flushed pink. "Are you accusing me of something?" Sir Zora spoke before Malik could answer. "We're pointing out a pattern, ma'am, one that seems to repeat itself in subtle ways." Sandra's tone tightened. "I think we should keep this civil." Malik looked up at her. His calm had weight. "It already is, ma'am. All we've done is say no." The silence that followed felt heavier than noise. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade. Then, from 2 rows up, Harold Jensen slowly turned around. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen this kind of moment before. "Is there an issue, miss?" he asked the flight attendant gently. Sandra blinked. "No issue, sir. Just a minor seating adjustment." Harold nodded slowly. "From what I can tell, the Jacksons are fine where they are." Sandra hesitated. "Sir, with respect, this doesn't concern everything concerning fairness concerns me," Harold said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority that didn't need volume, especially when it begins to look selective. Elena shifted in her seat, her lips pressed into a thin line. Zora glanced at Malik. "This is getting out of hand," she whispered. Malik nodded slightly, pulling his phone from the seat pocket. "I'm calling customer service before this escalates." Sandra's eyes widened. "Sir, that won't be necessary. I think it is," Malik said, his voice calm but edged with steel. He began to dial. Zora's fingers clutched his sleeve, her voice soft. "You sure?" He nodded. "We have the right to report discrimination." The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Even the baby stopped laughing. Malik pressed the call button and spoke evenly into the phone. "Yes, this is Malik Jackson. I'm currently on Flight 2187 to Atlanta, still on the tarmac. I need to report an incident involving a flight attendant, requesting that my sister and I vacate our seats for another passenger, seemingly without policy basis." Sandra stepped back, her composure cracking. "Sir, please, there's no need to involve anyone else." "I believe there is," Malik replied quietly. Zora's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the old familiar exhaustion that came with standing up for yourself in public. The exhaustion of knowing that calm had to do the work anger wanted to. Elena muttered something under her breath, something about people overreacting. That's when Harold stood up. His cane clicked against the aisle floor. "Captain," he called toward the front, his voice clear. "We need a word before takeoff." Sandra turned pale. "Sir, please sit down. We're about to taxi." "I'm aware," Harold said, steady as a stone. "But before this plane leaves the ground, I want the captain to know that what I just witnessed appears discriminatory." The words rippled through the cabin. People stared openly now. Zora's pulse raced, but Malik remained still. He placed the phone on his lap, eyes never leaving the flight attendant. Sandra stammered, "Sir, that's a serious accusation." "It is," Harold said, "and I'm prepared to stand by it." A murmur spread through the passengers, half discomfort, half solidarity. Then came a soft chime from the intercom. "Captain Reynolds to the cabin. Please." The voice was measured, formal. Sandra swallowed hard and disappeared toward the cockpit. For several minutes, no one spoke. Malik stared out the window, jaw tight. His reflection ghosted against the glass. Zora's hand found his. "You okay?" she whispered. He nodded, though his voice was low. "I'm tired. Z, not just today. Tired of how normal this still is." Before she could reply, the cockpit door opened. A tall man in uniform appeared, his presence instantly commanding. Captain David Reynolds, silver at his temples, eyes clear and steady. "Mr. and Ms. Jackson," he said, voice firm but calm. "Would you mind joining me for a brief conversation at the front of the plane?" Zora blinked. "Are we in trouble?" "Not at all," he said, "but I'd like to understand the situation firsthand." Harold rose slightly. "I'll accompany them if that's all right." The captain nodded. "Please do, sir." As Malik stood, he glanced down the aisle. Dozens of eyes watched, some curious, some sympathetic, others simply uncomfortable. He straightened his jacket and met his sister's gaze. "Let's go tell the truth," he said softly. Zora squeezed his hand once, and together they followed the captain forward. Harold close behind. The murmur of the cabin followed them like a shadow. As they disappeared behind the curtain separating first class from coach, a quiet voice from somewhere in the back whispered, "Good for them." And just like that, the story of Flight 2187 began to change direction one steady, unshaken step at a time. The narrow aisle felt longer than it was as Malik, Zora, and Harold followed Captain Reynolds toward the front of the plane. The air back there had been heavy, but up here it felt almost too still, like the pause before a verdict. The captain gestured for them to stand near the galley, away from curious passengers. The curtain rustled closed behind them, muting the low hum of whispers that had filled the cabin. Sandra stood to one side, her face pale, fingers clasped in front of her. Her composure had the fragile look of glass that might crack under pressure. "Thank you for coming forward," Captain Reynolds said evenly. His voice carried authority, but also something rarer respect. "I understand there's been some disagreement over seat assignments." Malik met his gaze directly. "More than a disagreement. Captain, my sister and I were asked twice to move seats for another passenger. When we questioned why, the reasons changed." Reynolds nodded slowly. "And who made the request, Sandra?" Malik said without malice. "She approached us on behalf of Mrs. Carrington," Zora added. "At first, it was because Mrs. Carrington wanted to sit with her husband. Then it became a medical necessity. We were the only ones asked." The captain turned to Sandra. "Is that accurate?" Her hands tightened. "Captain, I was only trying to accommodate a passenger who claimed a health issue. I followed standard procedure, ask for volunteers, offer an alternative seat. That's all." Harold Jensen stepped slightly forward, leaning on his cane. His voice was calm, deliberate, with respect. "Captain, that's not what I witnessed. The Jacksons declined politely, but the matter didn't end there. When Mrs. Carrington expressed displeasure, the flight attendant persisted with shifting justifications. It was selective." Reynolds looked at him. "And you are Sir Harold Jensen, retired federal judge." Sandra's shoulders stiffened. The captain's brows rose slightly. "I see. Then I'll take your observation seriously." He turned back to Sandra. "Did you at any point inform the Carringtons that no passenger could be forced to change their assigned seat unless for safety reasons?" "No, Captain," Sandra admitted quietly. "I intended to resolve it without escalation." Malik's tone stayed measured, but his words cut clear. "That's the point. You wanted it quiet, not fair." The captain looked between them, weighing every detail. Years of command had taught him to read truth not from words, but from steadiness. The Jacksons stood firm but respectful. Sandra shifted slightly, eyes lowered. He exhaled through his nose. "I appreciate everyone's candor. Mr. Jackson, Ms. Jackson, you did the right thing by remaining calm. Judge Jensen, thank you for speaking up." He turned to Sandra. "Please step into the galley for a moment. I'll join you shortly." She hesitated, then nodded and slipped past the curtain. Reynolds faced the three passengers again. "I've been flying for 25 years. I've seen a lot of arguments, entitlement, genuine emergencies, but what I can't tolerate, not under my command, is any hint of discrimination." Zora's shoulders relaxed slightly, though her voice still trembled faintly with adrenaline. "We appreciate that, Captain." He nodded. "I'll speak to Mrs. Carrington next. If she did, in fact, misrepresent her condition to gain an advantage, she'll be documented, and Ms. Miller will face a report with corporate." Malik hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Captain, I'm not interested in anyone losing their job, but I am interested in accountability. My father always said, if you don't name the wrong, it'll keep its seat." The captain's lips curved slightly at the truth in that. "Your father's a wise man. He's waiting for us in Atlanta," Malik said quietly. Reynolds nodded, understanding more than he said. "Let me make this simple. You'll keep your seats. I'll personally monitor the cabin. And before we depart, I'll make an announcement reminding all passengers that respect and safety apply equally to everyone on this flight." Harold's eyes glinted. "That would be fitting. Captain." Reynolds extended his hand to Malik. "For what it's worth, sir, I'm sorry this happened under my command." Malik shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for saying that," Zora added softly. "It means more than you might realize." The captain gave a small nod and opened the curtain again. They stepped back into the main cabin where dozens of faces turned toward them. The stares were a mix, some curious, others sympathetic, a few uneasy. Harold walked ahead, calm as ever. Malik and Zora followed, their heads high, not defiant but dignified. When they reached row 16, Mrs. Carrington was still seated ahead, her posture rigid, Sandra's replacement. A younger flight attendant named Jasmine had taken over the aisle nearby. Her expression was kind but cautious. "Everything all right?" she asked quietly. Malik gave a small nod. "For now." Zora took her seat and leaned back, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The intercom chimed. Captain Reynolds' voice filled the cabin, steady and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Before we depart, I want to take a moment to thank you for your patience. Occasionally, situations arise that remind us why respect and fairness matter, whether we're on the ground or 30,000 feet in the air. On this flight, every passenger is valued equally. Every seat holds the same worth. That's our policy, and that's our principle. A murmur spread through the plane. Some people clapped softly. Malik glanced toward Harold 2 rows up. The older man gave a subtle nod of approval. Elena Carrington kept her eyes fixed forward, lips pressed tight. But when her husband reached over and touched her arm, she didn't pull away. Instead, she whispered something too quiet to catch. Zora looked at her brother, her voice low. "Do you think she'll learn from it?" Malik shrugged. Maybe, maybe not, but someone else on this plane will. The plane began to taxi, the gentle vibration underfoot marking forward motion. Through the window, sunlight streaked across the tarmac, gold and sharp. As they rose into the air, Zora finally allowed herself to smile. "You know," she said softly, "Dad always says progress starts in small spaces." Malik looked out at the clouds beginning to unfold below. And today, it started in row 16. Harold twisted slightly in his seat, his voice drifting back with warmth. "Couldn't have said it better myself. Son." The 3 of them exchanged quiet smiles as the aircraft climbed, breaking through a thin layer of gray into the clear blue beyond. Inside, the tension began to ease, not gone, but transformed. It had become something else now, something like understanding. And for the first time since boarding, Malik allowed himself to feel what he hadn't dared to earlier relief, laced with the faintest touch of hope. The plane leveled out above the clouds, its steady hum filling the silence left behind. The seatbelt sign flickered off with a soft chime, and passengers began to exhale in unison, the way people do after tension has brushed too close. Zora looked out the window. The sky was an endless canvas of white and blue, sunlight spilling across the wing like forgiveness. For the first time since boarding, she felt her shoulders loosen. Malik sat beside her, hands folded neatly on his lap. He wasn't reading anymore. He wasn't even pretending. His mind drifted somewhere between reflection and restraint. Jasmine, the new attendant, moved quietly through the aisle, offering drinks with a kindness that felt deliberate. When she reached their row, her smile was small but genuine. "Would either of you like something to drink?" she asked softly. "Water's fine," Malik said. "Same for me," Zora added. Jasmine poured the water carefully and placed the cups on their tray tables. She hesitated for a moment, then leaned in slightly, her voice low. "I just wanted to say, I'm really sorry about what happened earlier. I saw the whole thing. It wasn't right." Zora met her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "That means a lot." The young woman nodded. The captain handled it well, but still, it shouldn't have reached that point. Malik gave her a small nod of gratitude. "You did the right thing by being kind now. Sometimes that's what matters most." Jasmine smiled softly before moving on. The sincerity in her tone stayed with them long after she'd gone. For a while, the cabin settled into the rhythm of flight, soft chatter, the clink of ice, the hum of engines, but the incident still hung in the air like an unfinished sentence. Harold Jensen turned slightly in his seat 2 rows ahead, glancing back at the siblings. Malik caught his eye and gave a faint nod, an unspoken acknowledgement between men who had seen enough of the world to recognize its repeating patterns. Zora sipped her water and leaned closer. "You think he's all right?" Harold Malik asked. "He's fine. Men like him don't break easy." "I meant emotionally," Zora said. "It's got to be strange for him, too, seeing this again after everything he fought for decades ago." Malik's gaze softened. Maybe he's just tired of watching the same story play out with new faces. They sat in silence for a moment. Zora's fingers traced the condensation on her cup, forming invisible shapes. "You handled yourself well, you know," she said finally. He looked at her. "You think so? I know so. You stayed calm. You didn't let anger write the story." He smiled faintly. "I wanted to. Every part of me wanted to. But anger never earns understanding. Just attention." Zora nodded. "Dad used to say the same thing." Malik chuckled softly. "Yeah. Let your words weigh more than your volume." They both smiled at the memory. The sound of their quiet laughter felt like a fragile truce between what had been and what still hurt. A soft tap interrupted their moment. Harold had turned all the way around now, resting his arm on the back of his seat. "Mind if I join you two for a minute?" Zora gestured warmly. "Please." Harold eased himself up and shuffled into the empty aisle seat beside Malik. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Malik said. "You've already done more for us than most people would have." The older man waved it off. "You handled yourselves just fine. I just happen to have the benefit of old age and a loud voice." They laughed quietly, easing the weight in the air. Then Harold's tone turned thoughtful. "You know, I watched that flight attendant's face when the captain spoke. She wasn't hateful, not really. Just afraid of admitting she'd been unfair. That's how prejudice hides now behind fear of being wrong." Zora leaned in, her academic mind intrigued. "That's exactly what I teach, Mr. Jensen. Bias without malice. It's more dangerous because it doesn't look like what people expect." Harold nodded. "Exactly. Folks think racism wears a hood or carries a slur. They don't see it in polite requests and second glances." Malik's voice was quiet but firm. "And when you point it out, they say you're overreacting." The three of them sat in the hush of understanding, the kind that didn't need more words. After a pause, Harold smiled softly. "But today, something shifted. You two stood your ground without shouting. The captain stood for what was right without waiting for permission. Maybe that's what progress looks like now. Not loud marches, but small moments of truth." Malik looked out the window, sunlight reflecting in his eyes. Maybe, or maybe it's both. The quiet truth and the loud fight, it all keeps the world moving. Harold chuckled. "You sound like a preacher, just an architect," Malik said. "But I build things hoping they last." Harold nodded approvingly. "Then you understand justice better than most." The conversation paused as Jasmine passed again, offering refills. Zora declined with a kind smile. Harold thanked her quietly and took a sip of tea. When Jasmine moved on, Zora glanced toward the front of the cabin. Elena Carrington was still there, her posture tight, but she looked different now, less certain, smaller somehow. Her husband was speaking softly to her, his tone gentle. She wasn't arguing this time. She was listening. Zora's heart softened. Maybe even she's rethinking things. Malik followed her gaze. Maybe. Everyone has a moment when the mirror turns. "Do you think she'll apologize?" Zora asked. He shook his head. "I don't need an apology." just awareness. That's the seed of change. Harold smiled knowingly. That's the kind of thinking that turns anger into legacy. The plane hit a mild pocket of turbulence, jolting slightly. The seatbelt sign came back on. Passengers murmured, startled, then settled again. Malik stared ahead, his voice low. Funny how one bump makes everyone pay attention again. Zora smiled faintly. Maybe that's what life does too. He looked at her, then out the window again, clouds shifting below like slow-moving waves. I think you're right. For several minutes, no one spoke. The world outside was silent except for the hum of the engines and the occasional rustle of a page or a cough. Then Harold broke the quiet. You know, when this plane lands, it won't just touch down in Atlanta. It'll touch down on a story that deserves to be told. Malik met his gaze. We'll tell it, not with bitterness, but with truth. Good, Harold said softly. The truth always flies farther. The seatbelt light blinked off again. The plane steadied. Zora closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the vibration beneath her feet, the shared silence between strangers who had witnessed something larger than travel, something human. When she opened her eyes, the clouds had parted below, revealing the soft outline of the earth, tiny houses, winding rivers, sunlight catching on glass roofs. It looked peaceful. But Zora knew peace was never born from silence. It came from people who spoke softly when the world wanted them quiet. She reached over and rested her hand on Malik's. We're almost home. He smiled. Yeah, in more ways than one. The plane kept moving forward, quiet and steady, carrying not just passengers, but a small piece of change stitched quietly into the sky. The clouds below looked like soft blankets of peace, but Malik's thoughts didn't rest easily. The hum of the engines filled the cabin with a rhythm too steady for the way his heart beat. He sat still, eyes fixed on the small screen of his phone. Airplane mode was on, but his mind wasn't. Zora noticed the tension in his hands. You're thinking about making that call, aren't you? He looked at her, surprised she could read him so easily. You always did know. She smiled faintly. You're not the kind to let something like this just drift away. Malik exhaled, long and slow. It's not about the flight anymore. It's about what happens after. If I stay silent, it just becomes another invisible bruise. Zora leaned closer, her voice calm but filled with care. So make the call when we land. But promise me one thing, you'll do it your way, not theirs. Not out of anger, out of clarity. He nodded, pocketing the phone. Always. Harold Jensen turned from his seat ahead, his deep voice breaking the stillness. I take it you're thinking of reporting this beyond the airline. Malik didn't deny it. Maybe. I know how these things vanish once the headlines fade, but I also know visibility changes systems. Harold nodded thoughtfully. You're right. When injustice hides behind civility, light is the only remedy. Zora smiled softly. You sound like one of my lectures, Judge Jensen. Harold chuckled. I should sit in one of your classes sometime. Jasmine approached quietly with the beverage cart. More water, sir? She asked Malik, her tone warm. He accepted it with a nod. Thank you. She hesitated a moment, then said quietly, Captain Reynolds told me he's filing an official report. He said your patience made his job easier. Not everyone could have handled it that way. Malik met her eyes. Patience isn't the absence of anger. It's the control of it. Her expression softened. Well, I think that control changed how people saw what happened today." She moved on, leaving behind a silence that didn't feel heavy anymore, just reflective. The seatbelt sign blinked on again as the plane hit a soft pocket of turbulence. Passengers murmured, bracing instinctively. Zora steadied her cup, eyes still on her brother. "You know," she said, "this isn't the first time someone's asked you to give up your seat." Malik looked at her, confused for a second, then laughed softly. "You mean life exactly. In boardrooms, at conferences, on committees, people have been asking you to move over quietly for years." He smiled, the corners of his eyes softening. "And I never do. That's why I'm proud of you," she said. "You don't fight loud, but you fight long." He reached over and squeezed her hand gently. "We both do." From across the aisle, Harold cleared his throat. "If you two don't mind an old man's interruption, there's something I'd like to say before we land." Zora turned to him warmly. "Please do." He leaned slightly forward, his cane resting against his knee. "When I marched in Selma, I was your age. Mr. Jackson. People threw bottles, called us names. Back then, prejudice was loud, easy to point at. Today, it hides behind smiles and procedures. But what you did up here, without shouting, without hating, that's the new kind of protest. Quiet dignity can change rooms just as much as raised voices used to change streets." Malik listened, humbled. "You think that's enough?" Dignity Harold's smile was small, wise. It's never enough on its own, but it's where decency begins. The rest comes from action afterward, from what you do once the seatbelt sign turns off. Zora nodded, understanding. Action after stillness. "Exactly," Harold said, "and maybe one day someone will remember this moment as the day they chose better too." For a while, the only sound was the steady hum of the engines and the faint rustle of pages turning. Somewhere near the front, Elena Carrington had grown quiet. Her husband, Robert, rested his hand gently on hers. She hadn't spoken since takeoff, but now she turned slightly, eyes searching down the aisle toward Malik and Zora. Malik noticed. Their eyes met briefly. She looked away first. Zora saw it too. "You think she'll say anything? Maybe not today," Malik said, "but she'll remember." He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. The rhythmic vibration of the aircraft almost lulled him into calm. But his thoughts wouldn't stay quiet. He thought about his parents, his father's sermons, his mother's laughter, the community they built with open hands and tired hearts. He thought about every time he'd been mistaken for the assistant instead of the CEO, every glance that questioned his belonging before his competence. And he thought about his father's words. "If the world ever tries to move you, son, make sure you move it back with grace." When the captain's voice came through the speakers again, it carried a gentler tone this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Atlanta. Local time is 3:45. On behalf of the crew, I want to thank you for flying with us and for your patience and respect during today's journey." Zora smiled. He said respect again. He meant it. Malik opened his eyes, gazing at the clouds thinning below. He did, as the plane began its slow descent. Harold adjusted his seatbelt and turned slightly. "Mr. Jackson, if you don't mind, I'd like to give you my card when we land." Malik smiled. "You planning to sue the airline for me?" Judge Harold chuckled. "No, I'm planning to make sure your story doesn't disappear into policy paperwork. I have friends still on a few federal committees. They care about training, ethics, the quiet corners where discrimination hides. What you experienced today deserves to be heard by the right people." Zora's eyes brightened. "That's generous of you." "Not generous," Harold said softly. "Just right." Malik accepted the offer with a nod. "Thank you, sir. I'll call when we're on the ground." "Good," Harold said. "Maybe this time, justice can ride first class for once." They all smiled at that. Through the window, Atlanta came into view, a patchwork of rooftops, highways, and green trees glowing under the afternoon sun. "Home," Zora whispered. "We made it." Malik nodded, his voice low. "Yeah, but I think something else began up there." "What do you mean?" He looked out the window, eyes reflecting both weariness and resolve. "Change doesn't start with outrage. It starts with noticing, with one person saying, 'This isn't right,' and another listening. That's what happened today." Zora squeezed his hand. Then maybe this flight was meant for more than just getting us home. As the landing gear extended with a low rumble, Malik turned his phone back on. Notifications flooded in emails, texts, reminders, but one number stood out. His company's communications director, Jamal Thompson. He opened a new message and began typing slowly, deliberately. "Need to schedule a call with the airline's executive office. Not about a complaint, about a conversation." He paused, then added, "This isn't about revenge. It's about rebuilding trust." He hit send. The plane touched down moments later, tires kissing the runway in a soft thud. Passengers applauded, relieved. But Malik felt something deeper a landing inside himself. It wasn't the end of a flight. It was the start of something larger, something taking off within him. The wheels touched down on the Atlanta runway with a low, steady rumble that rolled through the cabin like a deep exhale. Sunlight poured through the windows, catching the quiet relief on faces that had weathered more than just turbulence. Zora leaned back, eyes closed for a moment, then whispered, "Home." Malik smiled faintly. "Feels different this time, doesn't it?" She nodded, sensing what he meant. The air seemed lighter now, but beneath it was something unspoken, like the silence after a storm that had washed away more than rain. The seatbelt sign clicked off. Around them, passengers began standing, stretching, reaching for bags. Conversations murmured back to life, half relief, half curiosity. Some glanced toward Malik and Zora, subtle looks of respect. Quiet nods, a few murmured words of encouragement. One woman passing by smiled warmly. "Good for you both," she said softly, her southern accent gentle as cotton. Zora returned the smile. "Thank you." Malik stood, retrieved their bags, and looked down the aisle. Elena Carrington and her husband were still in their seats, waiting. Elena's eyes flickered toward him, hesitant, almost uncertain. As he and Zora stepped into the aisle, Elena stood too. For a moment, their paths met in the narrow space between rows. She took a breath. "Mr. Jackson." Her voice was quiet, fragile. Malik turned, calm but attentive. "Yes, ma'am, I wanted to say—" She hesitated, words catching. "I didn't mean for things to go the way they did. It wasn't my intention to cause any harm." Zora watched her closely but said nothing. Malik's expression remained composed. "I understand." Helena swallowed, lowering her gaze. "I suppose understanding doesn't mean forgiven." "It doesn't have to," Malik said gently. "Forgiveness comes later. Understanding comes first." Their eyes met for just a moment longer, hers searching for absolution, his offering something quieter, truth without resentment. Then she stepped aside, letting them pass. Harold was waiting near the exit, steady on his cane, offering Malik a small, folded card. "My contact," he said. "It goes straight to someone in the Department of Transportation's Ethics Board. Tell them I sent you. They'll listen." Malik took the card carefully. "Thank you, Judge. You didn't have to get involved." Harold's eyes crinkled with warmth. "Son, I've spent my life watching good people stay silent because they're tired. You didn't. That deserves backup." Zora smiled. "And what about you? You've earned your rest." He chuckled softly. "Rest is for the righteous. I'm just retired." They laughed, a shared moment that lightened the weight of everything behind them. As they exited the plane, Captain Reynolds stood at the door, greeting passengers. His handshake with Malik was firm, deliberate. "Glad to have had you both on board," he said. "And I meant what I said up there. If there's ever another flight like this under my command, it'll end differently from the start." Malik nodded. "You already changed how this one ended. Captain, that's a start." The captain smiled, his tone respectful. Safe travels home. Once inside the terminal, the world opened into a rush of noise, rolling suitcases, loudspeaker announcements, and the faint smell of cinnamon from the coffee shop across the concourse. Yet, even in the noise, Malik felt something still inside himself. He stopped near a quiet seating area by the window overlooking the runway. The sky beyond was wide and open, the very space that had held their conflict only an hour before. He pulled out his phone. Zora watched him, understanding before he spoke. "You're making the call now?" He nodded slowly. "If I wait, the moment passes. The truth needs to travel while it's still warm." She sat beside him, hands folded, watching as he scrolled through contacts. He selected Jamal Thompson, comms director. The line connected after 2 rings. "Hey, boss." Jamal's cheerful voice came through. "Back on the ground." "Yeah," Malik said quietly. "Listen, I need you to reach out to the airline's public relations head. Tell them I want to schedule a conversation. Not about an incident report about equity training. I want to help them see what went wrong before they turn this into damage control." There was a pause on the other end. "So, not a lawsuit, not a statement." "No," Malik said. "Not yet. This isn't about punishment. It's about prevention. I want them to feel it, not fear it." Jamal exhaled softly. "That sounds like you, Malik." Malik smiled faintly. "Good. Let's keep it that way." He ended the call and sat back, the phone resting in his palm. Zora's voice was gentle. "You think they'll listen?" "They'll have to," he said. "Not because of my title, because of the truth." She looked at him with quiet admiration. "You turned a seat dispute into a lesson plan for the nation." He chuckled. "One flight at a time." A familiar voice interrupted them. "Mr. Jackson." They turned. Jasmine Lee was approaching, now off duty, her hair loose and her uniform jacket slung over her arm. She looked relieved, even happy. "I'm so glad I caught you," she said breathlessly. "Captain Reynolds told me what you planned to do. I just wanted to say thank you for handling it with grace." Malik smiled warmly. "You don't need to thank me. You stood up when it mattered." She shook her head. "You showed us all something important. People like me, new crew. Still learning, we notice who keeps calm when the world pushes." Zora smiled. "And maybe next time, someone else will notice you doing the same." Jasmine's eyes softened. "I hope so." Before she walked away, she looked back once more. You changed more than you know." After she left, Zora turned toward her brother. "She's right. You know." Malik's gaze drifted toward the runway again, where another plane lifted into the afternoon sky. "Maybe, but I think it's all of us who changed a little." They sat there for a while, letting the sunlight paint quiet gold across their faces. In the glass reflection, Malik caught his own eyes tired but steady. "Dad's gonna ask what happened on the flight," Zora said suddenly. Malik chuckled. "Yeah, and Mom will say, 'I hope you didn't cause trouble.' And you'll say," he smiled, "I'll say we just reminded a few people what fairness looks like at 30,000 feet." Zora leaned her head on his shoulder. "Content? That sounds like something he'd preach on Sunday." "Then maybe he'll be proud," Malik said softly. A chime echoed across the terminal, calling passengers for another flight. People hurried past families, business travelers, students, each carrying stories of their own. Zora stood, adjusting her bag. Ready to go home, Malik rose beside her. "Home sounds good." As they walked toward the exit, Harold's voice echoed faintly from behind, calling out one last time. "Don't forget that card." Son Malik raised it with a grin. "I won't." "Judge." They stepped into the sunlight outside the terminal, Atlanta's warm air wrapping around them like memory and promise. For a moment, Malik paused and looked back at the planes lined up against the horizon. "Funny," he said softly, "how one flight can ground so many truths." Zora smiled, "Or lift them higher." He nodded, and together they walked toward the pickup lane, their footsteps steady, their silence full of meaning. Atlanta's air was thick with early evening warmth, the kind that wrapped around you like a memory. As Malik and Zora exited the terminal, the sun was dipping low, washing the sky in gold and rose. The hum of traffic mingled with laughter and the shuffle of rolling suitcases. But among the noise, Malik spotted two familiar figures waiting near the pickup area, a sight that made his chest tighten with quiet gratitude. Their father stood tall, his silver hair glinting in the light, his posture still proud despite the years. Beside him, their mother, small but fierce, waved a homemade sign that read in careful handwriting, "Welcome home, our pride and joy." Mom Zora called out, her voice catching slightly. Their mother's face lit up as she hurried forward, arms wide. "My babies," she exclaimed, embracing both of them at once, as if trying to make up for every mile that had ever separated them. Malik laughed softly. "You still call us that. You'll always be my babies," she said, her eyes glistening. "And don't you argue with your mother." Their father's handshake turned into a long hug, firm and wordless. "Good to have you home, son," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Good to be home, Dad." Once the greetings softened into easy chatter, they piled into the family SUV, laughter filling the space as the city rolled by. Zora pointed out new murals on the buildings, their colors vivid against the concrete. Their father told stories about a new neighbor who wouldn't stop mowing his lawn at dawn. Their mother hummed along to an old Sam Cooke song on the radio. It felt like peace, familiar, grounding peace. When they reached the Jackson home, a warm brick house with hydrangeas blooming by the porch, the smell of baked cornbread and roasted chicken greeted them before they even stepped inside. "Dinner's ready," their mother announced proudly, "and don't think you're escaping without telling me everything about your flight." Malik and Zora exchanged looks. "I told you she'd ask," Zora whispered. "I know," Malik said with a grin. You're telling the story this time." "Oh, no," Zora shot back. "You're the one who almost called the captain." They laughed as they sat around the dinner table, the same one they'd gathered around for decades. The plates gleamed, the sweet tea glistened, and somewhere between the chicken and mashed potatoes, their mother fixed them with the look that meant, "Now, start talking." Zora began. "Well, let's just say it wasn't your average flight." Their parents listened in quiet focus as she described the events: the late passenger, the demand to switch seats, the confrontation that unfolded. Malik filled in the details she skipped, his voice calm but edged with the weight of what he'd felt in that moment. When they reached the part about Harold Jensen standing up, their father's brow furrowed. "A white man stood for you?" "Yes," Malik said simply, and not just stood, he spoke with conviction, said he was a retired civil rights attorney. Their father leaned back, thoughtful. That's rare, but it shouldn't be. Their mother's voice was soft. And how did it end? Zora smiled faintly, with the captain apologizing, with a conversation instead of an argument, and, with Malik deciding to make a call. Their father turned to him. "What call?" Malik hesitated for a moment. Not a complaint, a conversation with the airline about training, policy, awareness. "I want to turn it into something constructive." Their father nodded slowly, pride flickering in his eyes. "That's what I prayed you'd say." "You're not angry?" Malik asked quietly. "I'm angry," his father said, "but anger without purpose is just noise. You gave it direction. That's the difference between reaction and leadership." Their mother reached across the table, resting her hand on Malik's. "When you were little, you used to get upset whenever someone cut in front of you in line. You'd stomp your foot and say, 'That's not fair.' I used to worry you'd lose that sense of fairness when you grew up." Malik smiled softly. "Guess I didn't." She shook her head, her eyes glistening. "No, you didn't. You just learned to fight fairer." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the sounds of forks and soft jazz filling the room. The glow of the evening light fell across family photos on the walls, graduations, weddings, birthdays. After dinner, Malik and his father sat on the back porch. Fireflies blinked in the grass, and the night air carried the faint scent of honeysuckle. His father poured 2 glasses of bourbon, handing one to him. "You know," he began, "your grandfather used to drive delivery trucks through Alabama during the 60s. They'd make him wait outside stores, wouldn't let him use restrooms, but he'd still say, 'I'll get the job done.'" Malik looked out into the dark yard. He must have been strong. He was tired, his father corrected gently, but he kept showing up. That's where our strength comes from. Not from never being tired, but from showing up anyway. Malik nodded slowly. "I felt that today. Tired. But I couldn't just let it go. That's the legacy," his father said. "Not bitterness. Persistence." Zora joined them a few minutes later, carrying 3 mugs of coffee. "Mom's on the phone with Aunt Denise," she said, laughing. "She's already telling her you stood up to an entire airline." Malik groaned. "Here we go. Don't worry," Zora teased. "By tomorrow, she'll say you grounded the plane yourself." Their father chuckled. "And by next week, you'll have saved the whole flight." The laughter came easily now, rich, familiar, healing. As the night deepened, Malik leaned back, gazing at the stars above. "You ever think change feels too slow?" Zora followed his gaze. "Always. But slow doesn't mean still." Their father smiled. "That's the truth," right there. The porch light flickered, catching their faces in its soft glow. For a moment, 3 generations of strength, the past, the present, the becoming sat together in quiet understanding. Malik took a sip of his coffee, feeling the warmth spread through him. Tomorrow, I'm going to draft a proposal for that training program. Something real, something they can't ignore. Zora nodded. And I'll help. We'll make it a joint project, real stories, real change. Their father raised his glass slightly, to action after stillness. Malik clinked his glass softly. To showing up, the crickets sang louder. The night grew still. Somewhere deep inside, Malik felt a peace he hadn't realized he was missing. For once, the world hadn't changed around him. He had changed how he met the world. The Jackson family home shimmered with life that Saturday evening. Laughter spilled from the open windows, the air fragrant with barbecue smoke, and the faint perfume of magnolias drifting in from the garden. Strings of golden lights hung between the trees, and the hum of conversation mixed with the gentle rhythm of jazz floating from the speakers on the porch. It was the Jacksons' 40th wedding anniversary, a celebration of love, resilience, and time. Zora stood near the refreshment table, arranging cups and napkins, while Malik adjusted the projector for the photo slideshow. Their mother moved gracefully between guests, hugging old friends and fussing over trays of food, while their father was surrounded by a circle of laughing cousins retelling stories that seemed to grow taller each year. 40 years, Zora said softly, glancing at Malik. You think we'll ever reach that kind of peace? He smiled, clicking through the slides. If we inherit even half their patience, maybe. She chuckled. Patience and Mom's ability to forgive Dad for forgetting anniversaries 3 years in a row. Malik laughed. That, too. The first photos began to play black and white shots of their parents' wedding in 1985, their mother's lace veil glowing like mist, their father's wide grin as he held her hand. The guests clapped softly. Then, amid the warm chatter, a familiar voice drifted from the doorway. I hope I'm not late to the party. Zora turned, surprised. Judge Jensen Harold stood there, smiling, a neat gray suit replacing his usual cardigan. When your mother invited me, I thought she was joking, but I wouldn't have missed it for the world. Malik approached, genuinely touched. You made it. Wouldn't be right to miss a milestone like this, Harold said warmly. Besides, I wanted to see you both again in a room filled with laughter instead of turbulence. Malik grinned. You came to the right place. As Harold mingled with guests, word of his presence spread. Everyone knew who he was, the retired judge who had fought for civil rights, whose name had been whispered with respect across the city for decades. When Malik's mother realized he'd arrived, she clasped her hands in delight. Oh, the Lord does send angels in suits, she said, ushering him to the front yard. You sit right here, Mr. Jensen. We'll make sure you eat before you preach. Harold chuckled. Ma'am, I don't preach anymore. Tonight, everyone preaches, she teased. As the evening deepened, lanterns glowed softly under the trees, and Malik took the microphone to make a short speech. His tone was steady but warm. 40 years ago, 2 people stood in front of their community and promised to love each other through everything, the highs, the hurts, and all the miles in between. They kept that promise, and in doing so, they gave Zora and me the foundation to stand on when the world shakes. The guests applauded. His father smiled proudly, his hand resting on his wife's shoulder. But, Malik continued, his voice lowering slightly. They also taught us that love isn't just what you say to family. It's how you treat the stranger sitting next to you. That's what's been on my mind lately." He paused. The crowd quieted, sensing something deeper. I had an experience on a flight a few days ago. It started with a moment of unfairness but ended with understanding. And I realized something: love and justice are the same when they're practiced right. Both mean seeing people fully. There was silence. Then Harold rose slowly from his chair, cane in hand. "Son," he said gently, "if you don't mind, I'd like to add something to that." Malik handed him the microphone. The guests turned toward the old man with quiet respect. Harold looked out at the gathered faces, black, white, brown, young and old, and smiled. "When I first met these two," he said, nodding toward Malik and Zora, "we were sitting 30,000 feet in the air, tension thick enough to slice, fear hiding behind politeness, but what I saw that day reminded me of why I ever believed in progress." He turned to Malik. "You didn't shout. You didn't fight ugly. You stood tall and steady. And in doing so, you reminded everyone on that plane that dignity isn't about how loud you are, it's about how true you are." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Harold continued, his voice steady but filled with quiet passion. "We've come a long way from the days when justice meant marching through tear gas and dogs. But the fight isn't over. It's just changed shape. It happens in offices, classrooms, airports, and dinner tables. It happens when someone refuses to move their seat not out of stubbornness, but out of self-respect." The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. Harold's eyes softened as he looked toward Malik's parents. "And it happens when families like yours raise children who know their worth and live it without apology. That's legacy. That's victory." Applause filled the yard, warm and long. Malik's mother dabbed at her eyes. His father stood, walking over to Harold, and clasped his hand firmly. "Thank you, sir. You've said what I didn't know I needed to hear." When the applause finally faded, Malik leaned toward Harold. "You know you just stole my speech, right?" Harold laughed, borrowed it, with interest. The night continued in a glow of music and laughter. Guests danced under the string lights. Children ran barefoot across the grass, and the smell of peach cobbler drifted through the warm air. Zora found Malik standing at the edge of the yard, watching the crowd. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, just thinking how strange it is. A week ago, we were arguing over airplane seats. Now look at this. People of every color dancing together under our parents' backyard lights." She smiled softly. "That's what happens when you refuse to let anger define the ending." He turned to her. "You ever think maybe that flight wasn't an accident? Maybe we were meant to be there, to meet Harold, to spark something bigger?" "I don't believe in coincidence," she said. "Just timing." The music changed to an old favorite, Al Green's "Let's Stay Together." Their parents took the floor, moving slowly, perfectly in sync even after 4 decades. The guests clapped, swayed, and cheered them on. Zora whispered, "Look at them. That's what enduring love looks like." Malik smiled, his voice soft. "And that's the world we're still trying to build, one that lasts." Harold joined them, a plate of cobbler in hand. "You too," he said between bites. "Ever think about writing a book together, lessons from 30,000 feet?" I'd read it. Zora laughed. "We'll add you to the acknowledgments." Malik chuckled. No promises about royalties. The three of them laughed, the sound blending with the music and the hum of cicadas, under the Georgia night sky, surrounded by family, friends, and stories that had traveled across generations. Malik felt something rare closure that didn't end the story, but opened it. Injustice had sparked a call. The call had led to connection, and connection had brought them here to a backyard glowing with light, love, and the quiet certainty that progress still had a pulse. The first light of morning spilled across the hotel suite, turning the white curtains into thin sheets of gold. Atlanta was just waking up, distant car horns, the low hum of traffic, and the faint scent of coffee drifting from the hallway. Malik stood by the window, his reflection blending with the city skyline. He'd slept only a few hours, though not from unrest. His mind was alive, still tracing the echoes of laughter from the night before, his parents dancing under the lights. Harold's speech, the feeling of shared peace that came when old wounds started to heal. For the first time in days, he felt still. Zora knocked lightly before letting herself in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You awake?" "Good. I brought the cure for last night's celebration." He smiled. "Black, no sugar." "Of course," she said, handing him a cup. "I figured you'd need it more than me." They sat on the sofa, quiet for a moment. Morning sunlight washed over them, and the mood was calm until Malik's phone began to buzz on the coffee table. The screen flashed with an unfamiliar number, but the corporate area code caught his attention. Malik Jackson speaking. He answered. A composed female voice came through the line. "Mr. Jackson, this is Claire Winters. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of SkyConnect Airlines. I'm calling personally regarding your experience on Flight 2187. Zora's eyes widened. She mouthed silently. The CEO, Malik, turned slightly away, keeping his tone even. "Good morning, Ms. Winters. I appreciate your call. I understand something occurred aboard your recent flight that did not reflect our company's values." She continued. "We've received internal reports as well as messages from crew members and passengers. I wanted to speak directly with you before any public statement is made." Malik's jaw tightened slightly. "I see." Claire paused, then added, "I want to offer my sincere apology for what you and your sister went through. There's no excuse for how that situation unfolded. I take full responsibility." He appreciated the sincerity in her voice, but he also heard the faint weight of corporate caution. "Apologies matter," he said softly, "but they're only the first step." "I agree," she said quickly, "which is why I wanted to ask, would you be open to consulting with us on an internal program, a new initiative around cultural awareness, empathy training, and equitable policy review? We've begun drafting it, but after reading your background and seeing how you handled that situation, I believe your insight could be invaluable." Malik's hand tightened around his coffee cup. The room felt very still. "Ms. Winters," he said after a moment, "that's not what I expected this morning." She gave a faint laugh, one that sounded nervous but genuine. It's not what most people expect from an airline CEO either, but sometimes the right lesson comes from the wrong moment. Zora watched her brother carefully, sensing his thoughts. Malik took a slow breath. "I'm open to a conversation, but I'll only do it if the goal isn't reputation management. It has to mean something. It has to reach the ground crew, the flight attendants, the corporate boardroom, not just passengers." There was a brief silence, then Claire said softly, "Understood. That's what I want too." He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Then, yes, let's talk. Thank you, she said, relief in her voice. I'll have my assistant coordinate details for next week. And, Mr. Jackson. Yes, I read one of your keynote speeches from a few years ago about rebuilding through empathy. You said, the world doesn't change from shame, it changes from seeing. That line stuck with me. Malik was quiet for a beat. I'm glad someone heard it. When the call ended, he set the phone down slowly. Zora leaned back, half smiling. You just got invited to fix the sky. He laughed quietly, or at least helped clear the clouds. She looked thoughtful. Do you think she's genuine? I think she's trying, he said. And trying is where change begins. They sipped their coffee in silence. Outside, the city had fully awakened sunlight glinting off office windows, taxis moving in steady rhythm, people crossing the streets with purpose. Zora broke the quiet. You remember what Harold said last night? About dignity being the new protest I do? She smiled faintly. You just turned that into policy. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. Let's hope so. Her phone buzzed, then a message from their mother, breakfast's on. Don't make me call twice. Zora grinned. Guess Mom's still in charge, always. Malik said, standing. They left the suite together, stepping into the corridor filled with morning light. The elevator ride was silent, peaceful, but Malik's mind wasn't still anymore. The conversation with Claire had opened a door, not just for the airline, but for him. For years. He'd built structures of steel and glass. But maybe now it was time to build something less tangible, something that could reshape how people saw one another. When they reached the hotel lobby, Harold Jensen was already there, sitting in a leather chair by the window with a newspaper folded neatly on his lap. He looked up, smiling. Morning. You too? You look too well rested for people who hosted half the city last night. Zora laughed. Coffee helps. Harold's eyes twinkled. And maybe good news. Malik nodded slowly. The CEO of Sky Connect just called. Harold raised a brow. Oh, and what did she want, an apology or an alliance? Both, maybe, Malik said. She asked me to help design a training initiative, something permanent. Harold nodded approvingly. That's what real justice looks like, not just punishment participation. Malik smiled slightly. You think I should do it? Harold leaned back, thoughtful. Only if you can do it without bitterness. People can feel the difference between correction and condemnation. The first changes minds, the second just builds walls. Malik exhaled slowly. That's what I want to build, bridges, not barricades. Harold smiled. Then you already have the blueprint. They left the hotel together, stepping into the bright Atlanta morning. The city seemed alive with possibility, children laughing near a fountain, an old man feeding pigeons, two strangers holding the door open for each other at the cafe across the street. Zora looked at her brother. You ever notice how, after the worst storms, the sky looks cleaner? He glanced upward. The clouds had thinned, sunlight breaking through in bright, steady beams. Yeah, he said quietly, and sometimes the flight you didn't want to take is the one that brings you home. They walked toward their parents' car, waiting at the curb. Harold trailing just behind, humming softly. The day stretched ahead clear, promising, full of work yet to be done. For Malik, the journey was far from over, but for the first time, he wasn't just reacting to the world. He was helping reshape it one conversation, one company, one act of seeing at a time. The view from the glass conference hall stretched across the Chicago skyline, endless blue above, mirrored towers below. Flags bearing the Sky Connect Airlines logo fluttered outside in the mild spring wind. But this time, they stood for more than flight. They stood for change. Malik Jackson adjusted his tie in the reflection of the window. The skyline shimmered behind him, sunlight glancing off the lake. He looked composed, but his heart was heavier than he'd admit, not from anxiety, but from the weight of everything that had led here. Zora entered the room quietly, tablet in hand. They're almost ready for you. You've got journalists, the board, and about 300 employees in the audience. No pressure. He smiled. After what we lived through a year ago, this feels simple. She gave him a look of quiet pride. You turned turbulence into transformation. Not many can say that. He adjusted his cufflinks, a gift from their father, engraved with the initials MJ. You think Mom's watching the live stream? She made Dad set up the laptop an hour ago, Zora said with a laugh. She's already texted me twice to remind you to smile. Malik chuckled. Of course she did. The door opened again. Claire Winters stepped in, poised in a navy suit. Her expression was calm, but her eyes revealed both gratitude and respect. Malik, she said warmly, I wanted to thank you again for being here. It means a lot to all of us. He nodded. You've done the hard part. Claire, you didn't just promise change, you followed through. She smiled softly. We did it together. The Equity Initiative has reached every department, over 5,000 employees trained, new hiring pathways created, and a cultural audit that's becoming a model for the industry. Zora added. I read about the mentorship program Jasmine started for new crew members. Impressive. Claire's smile widened. You'll see her today. She's one of our speakers. Malik felt a quiet satisfaction stir in his chest. The idea that had started with a moment of injustice was now reshaping how thousands of people worked, flew, and treated one another. The event coordinator appeared at the door. Mr. Jackson, we're ready for you. Malik nodded. Let's do it. He walked out into the conference hall, where rows of faces turned toward him. The murmur quieted as he took the stage. Behind him, a large screen displayed the title, The Seat We Keep Dignity at Every Altitude. He took a slow breath and began. A year ago, I sat on Flight 2187 with my sister, heading home. What should have been an ordinary journey turned into a test of patience, of pride, and of progress. A flight attendant made a choice, one rooted in unconscious bias. And that choice reminded me of something deeper, that equality isn't tested in courts or on picket lines anymore. It's tested in moments, in choices, in how we see the person sitting beside us. The room was utterly silent. I could have walked off that plane angry, he continued, but instead, something unexpected happened. A stranger, Judge Harold Jensen, stood up, not because he had to, but because silence wasn't an option. And later, Captain Reynolds chose accountability over avoidance. They reminded me that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to move. He paused, his gaze sweeping the audience. Since that day, I've worked with Claire and her team to build what we now call the Sky Connect Equity Initiative, a program rooted in awareness, empathy, and measurable change. We've learned that dignity is not a policy, it's a practice. You can't teach it in a classroom if it's not lived in the crew room. Applause began softly, then grew. "And I've learned something else," Malik said, voice lower, more personal now. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing to build something better from the pieces left behind." In the second row, Zora watched her brother speak, her eyes glistening. When he finished, the applause rose like a wave. Some stood, others wiped tears. Claire came on stage, shaking his hand firmly. "Malik," she said into the mic, "your leadership didn't just help us correct a mistake, it helped us redefine who we are." Malik smiled humbly. Then we both did our jobs. After the speeches, the atmosphere turned lighter. Reporters gathered near the back, employees mingled, and the sound of laughter returned. Malik was speaking with Zora when a familiar voice called from behind. "Mr. Jackson." He turned. Jasmine Lee approached, her uniform replaced by a tailored blazer with the Sky Connect logo. Her smile was bright, her eyes alive with purpose. "I told you you'd change more than you knew," she said. Malik laughed. "And I told you kindness would do the same." Zora extended her hand. "Congratulations on your promotion." Jasmine, "Thank you." "Professor Jackson," Jasmine said, "I actually used some of your sociology lectures in our empathy workshops. The one about invisible prejudice had hit home." Zora smiled, touched. "That means more than you know." Claire joined them, holding a tablet. "Jasmine's leading our next phase, Project Horizon. She's making sure every new hire understands that service begins with respect." Jasmine beamed. "And that everyone, no matter their seat, deserves to belong." Malik looked at her proudly. "That's the legacy right there." The rest of the afternoon unfolded in a warm blur: interviews, photographs, laughter, plans, when the conference finally ended. The sun was setting outside, staining the glass walls with soft amber light. Malik stood alone for a moment, watching the city glow. He heard footsteps and turned. Harold Jensen stood in the doorway, cane in hand, smiling gently. "I told you the truth always flies farther," the old man said. Malik's grin widened. "You were right. You usually are." Harold chuckled. "You've built something that will outlast all of us. That's all any of us can hope for." He stepped closer, his tone softening. "I came to watch because I wanted to see if you'd lose your fire once things got comfortable. You didn't. You turned comfort into calling." Malik looked down, humbled. "I just kept moving forward." "That's how you win," Harold said. "Not by running faster, by not sitting down when it's easier." Outside, a plane crossed the sky, its trail carving a silver line through the clouds. Malik followed it with his eyes. "Funny," he said quietly. "A year ago, I thought that flight broke something in me. Turns out, it built something instead." Harold smiled. "That's how change works. Pain first, purpose after." Zora appeared then, joining them by the window. "Mom just texted," she said with a grin. "She wants to know if this means you're officially famous now." Malik laughed. "Tell her I'm just a man who didn't give up his seat." They stood together, watching the plane disappear into the distance. The sunlight faded, leaving only the quiet hum of the city steady, resilient, full of motion. Malik whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "The seat we keep is the world we build." Zora took his hand gently. "Then let's keep building." And as the lights of Chicago flickered on, one by one, Malik felt the kind of peace that only comes after a storm, the peace of knowing that the world could still rise, if only enough people chose to stand. Sometimes The most powerful battles are fought in silence, not in anger, but in grace. Malik and Zora's story reminds us that dignity isn't about pride. It's about peace, the kind that comes from knowing your worth and refusing to let the world shrink it. Their calm defiance on that flight didn't just confront prejudice, it revealed the quiet strength of generations who've endured, taught, and loved through injustice. For older viewers who've seen the world change, yet still feel echoes of the past, this story whispers something deeper. Progress doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands its ground. In our daily lives, whether it's speaking up against unfairness, listening when it's uncomfortable, or teaching the next generation what respect looks like, every small act matters. Justice, after all, is not just a law. It's a choice we renew each day. Thank you for watching and sharing this journey with us. Stories like Malik and Zora's remind us that compassion, courage, and understanding still have power in today's world. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. It helps us bring more true and meaningful stories to life. Your engagement keeps these voices heard, these lessons remembered, and this community growing. Together, let's keep standing for respect, hope, and humanity, one story at a time.